Hello, I'm Sorcerer, and this is my Ice Shards Sorcerer guide. This build is not exactly new, and I'm not going to show you how it works. It's very simple. You shoot Ice Shards and everything dies, or you press Frost Nova and then you don't even have to shoot Ice Shards, everything just dies. This build is very good. In fact, it's the best build for Sorcerer, for pretty much every task you can think of, except killing Uber, but we'll get to that later. So, first, let's start with the items. We have for our defensive slots, of course, Aspect of Disobedience and Frostblitz aspect to cast more Frost Nova, which of course is the spell that makes everything die, so that's very good. And then Raiment of the Infinite, same as in every build, is our ideal chest piece. The extra stun and pull together just makes everything way more powerful, adds a lot of damage, a lot of convenience. This item is just good. And then for the last not offensive slot, we have Aspect of Shared Misery, which works very good with this build because unlike most of them, you actually have very high hit chance, and this helps you apply crowd control to all enemies that are not caught into your Raiment and Frost Nova combo, that are just standing somewhere in the corners, and then when you're speed farming, it helps you kill them faster, and when you're pushing, it helps you not die from their attacks. So it's just very nice to have it here. And then we have our damage offensive aspects. It is Conceited, very standard and normal, and Stormswell, which is better than average on this build because you apply vulnerable not just with Frost Nova but also with Ice Shards itself. And then we have Control, of course, the special Ice Shards Pierce aspect, which is necessary to make our AoE damage good. And the last one I choose is Retribution, which works very well with Raiment, obviously. And another option for this slot is Accelerating Aspect, that gives you attack speed. But I prefer Retribution because, well, first of all, 40% damage is a lot compared to 25% attack speed, it's quite a bit higher. And second of all, attack speed doesn't help your enchantment, it only helps you manually cast Ice Shards, so these ones don't fly fast, don't conjure faster with higher attack speed, so Retribution helps everything, as long as you can do the stun, and stun is very easy to do with Raiment. And finally we have our Elementalist aspect for massive crit chance bonus. So for skills, we have, of course, the ever-present 4 defensive skills. They are very good, and they're very important. And in this build, Frost Nova becomes even better than usual, because you not only apply Freeze and Vulnerable, you also make the Freeze makes your Ice Shard enchant work. And then with Ice Shard enchant and with Pierces and everything, it just basically kills everything. You press Frost Nova, everything dies. That's what this build does, that's what it's famous for. Then we have our main skill, of course. Ice Shards, they deal damage and they apply Vulnerable. It's a very good skill. And the last skill slot is Meteor. Meteor is included just to apply Immobilize. And Immobilize, makes enemies takes roughly double damage, because we have Devouring Blaze and we have Aspect of Control. And 2 more skills we have here in basic cluster. They're just used for enchantment. So Firebolt we use all the time, and Frostbolt we sometimes use instead of Ice Shards to stagger the boss. And then we have our normal passives for the damage and for some defense, as well as all the cold damage passives. And finally we have Shatter for our key passive. This is in the final build. And before that we use Avalanche. For enchantment slots, we have obviously Ice Shard to add AoE to the build, because Ice Shard itself is more or less single target skill, and then we have only Aspect of Piercing Cold to make it slightly less single target, but it's still not that great against large crowds, and then this enchantment really solves all the problems we have with AoE. And of course, Firebolt enchantment, can't leave your house without it. It's just very good. Free burning means free damage reduction, and the most broken passive. I think actually across all classes, because it's just so much, 10% separate multiplier per rank, and then it's increased to 25 as well under some conditions. Absolutely crazy. So now onto the Paragon boards. Please notice that there is actually two of them here. The normal version and the one that you switch to after you find Raiment of the Infinite, because now you have stuns in your build, and with stuns you can use different boards. So one thing you need to take note of when you go through this board as you progress, like something that doesn't usually, is that after you do your second board, Burning Instinct, you need to first attach the Frigid Fate board, and then you go into your next board, which is not Frigid Fate, which is Static Surge, but this way, later, you will be able to get additional bonuses from these vulnerable damage nodes, and they're very important. So you need to be a little bit inefficient here and spend like 5 extra points to get to this exit before you can actually get here where you spend your points. But in any case, the final board looks like this. And, well, there's nothing really unusual here. We have our Distraction Glyph for core skill. It's a must-have. We have our Control Glyph, which is just very good for every build. And same for Flame Feeder, Exploit, and Tactician Frigid Fate board for more vulnerable damage. And finally, the last glyph we use is Elementalist, which is very good here because we have cold damage, we have lightning damage from teleport, and we have fire damage from the burning. So we can get all the three bonuses of all three elements of this one very easily. And then since we have, this is a Raiment version of the board, we use Static Surge with a lot of damage to stunned enemies, like all over the place. And also some maximum mana, which is quite important for this build. So this roughly is the board. And well, the gameplay is extremely basic. You cast Frost Nova, stuff dies. If it doesn't die, you cast Ice Shards on it, and you have all the defensive skills you use to protect yourself. One like little thing is Meteor. Meteor is, well, basically a double damage button, but it takes some time to activate. So you only use it when you really need it. And usually you just start off with Meteor, and then you teleport into Meteor, and you pull all enemies inside the AoE, and then they get immobilized, stunned, you press Frost Nova, they get frozen, and then they explode. Now onto resource management. Ice Shards are pretty good on resource. They don't get very good right off the bat, but once you stack some mana cost reduction, resource generation, like a hit chance and stuff like that on your gear, you just become like very spammy, and mana basically never even drops. So the big part of it is because like a hit chance is actually good on this skill. It's 16% baseline, and there's 5 shards, so it's 80%. Then you have your bonuses, it becomes like easily over 100%. And then you have Piercing Cold, and you have ricochets from enhanced Ice Shards, and each shard can hit multiple times, each hit can trigger lucky hits, and then it ends up proccing a lot. And so there's also 3 different lucky hits you can proc. There's Frigid Breeze, which gives you mana straight up every time you hit a vulnerable enemy. And there's the same like a hit chance to regain resource roll on your items, which doesn't even require enemy to be vulnerable. And there's Avalanche passive, which is used, well, basically until you get a very good gear, so you don't have to use it anymore. That makes your next Ice Shard free, so essentially it gives you mana, as much mana as it costs to cast an instrument, right? In the early game, this is still not going to be enough, because everything only gives 15 mana, this thing only procs once in a while, this thing doesn't even exist in the early game, and Ice Shards cost 30 without any reduction, so you gotta add something else, and something else in this case is Prodigious Aspect, which you can get in the Codex, and well, that also adds you a bunch of mana. And well, with there's a whole host of stats you need to get on your gear to actually make this work. Roughly the hierarchy of them goes like in this order. Cooldown is most important, not strictly for mana, but just for all the normal benefits of cooldown reduction, but it also gives you mana via Prodigy. And then you have mana cost reduction and resource generation. Resource generation only on ancestral items, but they do basically the same thing, and they're about as important. And then next one is like a hit chance to regain resource. You can have 2 rolls of this, but you only need 1 because you don't have enough mana to actually regain that much resource at once. You don't lose enough mana. And then the next stat is maximum mana, which you actually need to stack quite a bit, like at least 150-ish, to make your elementalist aspect work consistently. And finally, the last mana-related stat is like a hit chance. And out of all this list, it's like the weakest stat, so we always like prioritize it last. You can get it for basically free if you use a wand as your weapon and if you have a roll on the helmet. But on every other slot where like a hit can roll, there's usually a better stat, so you mostly just ignore it. And one gameplay advice regarding mana is that when you don't have mana to spam Ice Shards, just don't spam Ice Shards. Like cast them slowly. Cast one, wait a second, cast another one. What that's going to do is that you're not actually going to cast less Ice Shards than you would otherwise, because the only difference if you spam them, then well, you spam like 5 of them, then you have 0 mana, and then you have to do the same thing anyway. You cast one, and you wait a couple seconds for mana to regen, you cast another one. But if you do that, if you let your mana drop to 0, then your elementalist goes bye-bye, and then you deal half the damage, and then you have to suffer this for twice as long. So just pace yourself and keep your mana high, and well, eventually you get more stats and you can spam, and then you will be happy. So now moving on to the progression here. So this is compared to average guide a bit more steps. I added like one intermediate step. So you start as a level 1 crook with only Codex of Power aspects, and well, you can get 6 aspects out from your final build on the Codex, and then one last to get is Ghostwalker, just to run a bit faster. And then what you look to transition into is the so-called maximum mana setup, where you use also, instead of one of the damage aspects, instead of Stormswell, I think, you use aspect of Frozen Memories, which basically doubles your avalanche. Okay, and before I get to that, so apart from your non-existent legendary powers, you also use slightly different skill tree. So the difference is that you don't use any burning, because, well, the main benefit behind burning is Devouring Blaze, and Devouring Blaze only works on crit strikes, and at this point, when you just have only Codex and some shit items, you usually don't have any crit chance. Even your Elementalist aspect is going to be like 20% from the Codex, and it's also not going to be up because you just have no mana to maintain it. So this crit chance bonus basically doesn't work, and you likely don't have any damage to burning or damage reduction from burning on your gear, so burning becomes unneeded. So what we do, we drop completely Devouring Blaze, we drop Meteor, because without Devouring Blaze, Immobilize is also not as important, and instead we focus entirely on the mana regain. So we pick up Precision Magic for more lucky hits, which is, well, as I said before, it's not the best stat for mana, but it helps. We, instead of Meteor, use Deep Freeze, which is a cooldown skill, so it procs Prodigy, and it also reduces your other cooldowns, so you can proc more Prodigy. And of course we use Avalanche, which is, well, very powerful lucky hit effect. Even if it doesn't proc very often, it's still very strong. And well, Shatter is not that great anyway before you find Raiment, because all enemies are far apart and they don't hit each other with a Shatter proc. And since we don't have need for burning, we just use Fireball enchant with just 1 point in Fireball. And well, it helps with AoE, it's very nice to have it. So with this setup, we we get this aspect of frozen memories, which makes Avalanche a lot more powerful. And then all the normal like aspects the same as in the final build. And instead of Raiment, we just use aspect of Fortune for more like a hit chance to get more mana back, which is like our biggest problem when starting it. So then it transitions into this early endgame version, which is basically just almost a late game build, but without Raiment. You still keep your armor with Aspect of Fortune. You just lose your Frozen Memories to get back Stormswell for 20% more damage. And then on the skill tree and the enchantment, you go back to almost the endgame version, except you keep Avalanche, because Avalanche is a lot to lose. But the Precision Magic and the Deep Freeze, they go away. And, well, finally, the fully optimized late end game setup includes Raiment, of course. And then with Raiment, Shutter becomes way more attractive. So we get that. And, well, you don't really have to get it because it deals a lot of damage, but most of the time this damage is overkill when enemies already stunned and frozen. They're gonna die anyway. But at the same time, you also don't really need Avalanche, because unless you go fight a very long, tough boss that takes like over a minute to kill, you're just not gonna run out of mana. Or maybe if you run a little bit, well, the fight is almost over by the time it starts dropping like below the Elementalist threshold. So I go with Shutter by default, but it's not a big deal if you like use Avalanche if you prefer more consistent mana, or if you don't have that good stats anyway. So for build scaling, there's nothing special going on with Ice Shards. It's just a normal spell. It scales with your weapon, and well, with all the normal offensive stats such as crit damage, vulnerable damage, and all the other kinds of damage. And well, the only thing is, as usual, for Sorcerer, you first focus on actually being able to cast your spells, so stacking cooldown reduction and various mana-related stats, and then you actually invest into purely offensive buffing stats. So moving on to the endgame variants of the build, which is small adjustments you can make for different activities. So for speed farming, we don't need to add to this build any kill speed. What we need is mobility, and mobility means teleport enchant. Teleport enchant, especially when combined with boots with extra evade charges, is incredible. It just gives you 5 teleports, and they have 2 separate cooldowns, so you can just teleport all over the place. And of course, with Raiment, teleport also gives you this stun and pull effect. So it really makes you faster at killing stuff. And we also put Ghostwalker aspect on the boots instead of Shared Misery, because when you're speed farming, you usually kill mobs in like 1 or 2 hits. So there's not a lot of opportunities to proc your lucky hit effects. So, and well, running faster is what you need when you're speed farming. And for the same reason, we get the move speed on Amulet if possible. It's like becomes your most important stat after cooldown reduction, because well, mana cost is still nice to have, but while speed farming, you almost don't cast Ice Shards. You just teleport and frost snow and then pick up loot. That's all you do. And for skill tree, since we don't use Firebolt enchantment anymore, we use teleport. We remove all the Devouring Blaze point, and we max out teleport to reduce its cooldown. And then we also don't use Meteor, because there's no time to use Meteor while speed farming. So we get extra 3 points to like just put it into passives. And well, as you see, I removed the Meteor, but I didn't put a new skill in its place. Well, that's because there's no skill that's useful. Like none of the skills that you have on the entire skill tree do anything for you while speed farming with Ice Shards. So you can just leave it empty, or if it doesn't sit right with you, you can put one of your generators in there, but you're never going to use it. And then, well, Paragon Board has some burning bonuses, which technically could be removed, but it's too much hassle in my opinion, so just leave them here. You can replace Flame Feeder Glyph with like Territorial, because replacing glyphs is free and easy, but don't respect your board for speed farming. Then we go to the Nightmare Dungeon push. And, well, I provide two variants to do it. So first is the normal build, basically. It's kind of a glass cannon build. The only difference from the normal one is that you use two-hander with aspect of control, and that deals way more damage, but you lose a lot of cooldown reduction because you don't have the offhand. But, well, while pushing, your approach to cooldown reduction is not the same. You can just, kill a group of monsters and then wait 5 seconds for all your cooldowns to come back up. There's no timer in high tier Nightmare Dungeons, so nobody's making you go faster. And, well, more damage is more damage. It lets you kill everything before your crowd control is over, and then that's how you stay alive mostly. Crowd control and Flame Shield is the only thing that works. So by default, I don't recommend to change skill tree compared to the normal endgame build at all, because, well, you are going to be one-shot a lot on the high tier Nightmare Dungeons, but you're not going to be one-shot by everything. Some of the small attacks, when you have your Disobedience stack up, will maybe take only half of your HP, or maybe some little ticks of poison or something else on the ground. You can survive some things. So the full glass cannon playstyle is only something you should do if you go way too high tier with not very optimal gear, like maybe with some missing stats on the pants or something like that, and then you literally cannot survive anything without Flame Shield. So then you can remove quite a few points, like the heal from Flame Shield, damage reduction from Teleport, Mana Shield passive, extra points from Protection. If you just think, well, if I don't have Flame Shield, I die, it is what it is. Then you have these extra points, you can put them into more damage, more Flame Shield ranks, and like this passive as well to reset your Flame Shield easier. And then, well, Nightmare Dungeons are actually the place where you need to use Meteor. So you start your rotation with Meteor, and then you teleport in Flame Shield with Flame Shield, cast Frost Nova, and you try to kill everything before your Flame Shield expires. And as usual, the cute thing you can do is to make sure you have 2 Flame Shields in one fight by first casting Flame Shield and then just shooting Ice Shards without using any other spells, so that when your Elemental unit procs, it will reset your Flame Shield and nothing else. And after it happens, you can again do your normal damage combo, but you have a second Flame Shield to cover you while you finish off some stragglers. And, well, this is the build that will take you highest, but it's of course very annoying to play when you're constantly one-shot by everything and have to respect every single little monster and kill them. And so we have the second variant, which is, well, it's trying to be tanky. It's still a sorcerer, so it's not really tanky, but it can survive a couple hits, even in like high tiers, 80, 90. And, well, that's a big improvement compared to being completely one-shot. But of course, you have to sacrifice quite a bit of damage for that. So the main source of survivability for the build is, of course, we just drop Raiment and we pick up a chest piece with like million damage reduction rolls. And, well, that's pretty much it. But, well, without Raiment, we don't have stun. So to get the stun back, we now run Lightning Spear with Invoke Lightning Spear upgrade. And together with Lucky Hit and Shared Misery, it's actually pretty good. It's like stunning everything, but well, it has long cooldown, especially when you don't have offhand, so it's quite clunky. And, well, now we have a new problem. We don't have Meteor anymore, so now we need Immobilize as well. And, well, to do Immobilize, we do Fist of Fate. So since we are a core skill build, we lose +4 ranks to our main damage skill, and we also lose crit chance, and we also lose attack speed, and we also lose an offensive aspect. So we lose a lot. But luckily we get this random chance to deal triple damage, which ends up on average 1.5 multiplier. And we get what we came here for, is we get the chance to immobilize. And it's really high chance, and with our high lucky hit and shared misery, it's very easy to again immobilize the whole room. So when your cooldowns are up, you will get all 3 crowd controls overlapped on everything. And well, without proper gloves, your damage will be lower, and without raiment, pulling everything together and like making good use of shatter, that's another damage loss, but overall it still works. So the changes we do to the tree outside of switching Meteor to Lightning Spear is we add Precision Magic, and we have to sacrifice even more damage. There was like Elemental Dominance passive, now it's gone. But we need this lucky hit chance to make our CC spread more consistent. And since we don't have Raiment, we use Avalanche, because, well, we need to shoot a lot more than normal, because our damage is quite low, and we don't have all the mana cost stats on the offhand, so we need it for mana. And also because, well, Shatter just doesn't do that much without Raiment. We change our board a little bit as well, and again, for the lucky hit, there's some lucky hit chance you can get on the Frigid Fate board, and it costs like about 15 points. So to get it, we remove some burning damage here, some non-physical damage on the starter board, and the elite damage over here on Caesar's Conduit, but we get 25% lucky hit chance, and that again makes everything a lot more consistent. So with this build, you just find enemies. You don't need to teleport like in the middle of them. You can just walk up to the side of them, cast Frost Nova, that's going to freeze like at least a few, and then from there you can spread the crowd control to everything. It will not spread vulnerable, but you make enemies vulnerable just by casting your Ice Shards, so that's not a big problem. And then, well, even with all the damage lost from not running proper gloves, not running raiment, the build still can kill an elite in like high tier without like having it become unstoppable in under 5 seconds. And basically that's all you need. And well, with good enough gear, it can kill elite in tier 100 as well. And then there's no tiers higher, so in that sense it becomes kind of strictly better than the Glass Cannon variant, because it's much easier to play. But this one just has way more potential. If your gear is not good enough to clear tier 100 with this build, the Glass Cannon variant will be able to do it, but it will be just harder to do. And then we have the Pinnacle Boss, the Echo of Lilith boss fight build. And it is very similar to the Blizzard, in that it uses the same strategy. You first do the stagger using one-handed weapon and Fist of Fate, and then you switch to a two-handed staff and proper gloves with all the damage stat and retribution, and then you blast the boss. We also switch around our aspects a little bit to get maximum damage out of it. We use Inner Calm and Conceited here, instead of Storm Swell, which is usually in the build. And then, of course, Staff has control. So for skill tree, we use, again, Avalanche, of course, because Shatter doesn't do anything, and Deep Freeze to protect yourself from one-shot attacks instead of Meteor, because we don't need Immobilize. We have Immobilize on Fist of Fate for Stagger, and it doesn't do anything for like this phase, for DPS. And then that's about it. And we also like remove points from Frost Nova, because Frost Nova is just build a little stagger button instead of being our best skill. And we put the points into like passives for more damage and more like hit chance. And the last thing is Enchantment switch. We don't use Ice Shards because there's no frozen enemies, and we just use Frostbolt to apply chill and to stagger the boss faster. And by the way, I forgot to mention this is also something you do in Nightmare Dungeon push builds. You switch your enchantments before you enter the boss room, because otherwise the boss takes a long time to kill. So I've been fighting her with this build for some time just to see how it works. And there's two things to compare it to Blizzard. The first thing is a good thing, is that your damage doesn't really depend on anything that the boss is doing. You don't have to make this stack of blizzards, you just shoot her. So you don't have to swap your weapons fast, you don't have to hope that she doesn't move too much. You just swap, you wait for your cooldowns, and then you go. And the damage is going to be pretty consistent and about the same every time, unless you get super unlucky and you just don't proc any lucky hits and your mana goes below 100. But that shouldn't happen with good gear. Now, here you see the bad part of it, is that the damage is just not as high as Blizzard, and you can't just kill her in one go and skip all the mechanics. So you have to stagger her twice in the first phase at least, and then you have to fight her and you have to kill her minions. But it's still faster and easier than just completely relying on non-stagger damage and ignoring stagger. And especially in the second phase, because in the second phase she's much easier to stagger, so you can just do it instantly when the fight starts, get 1/3 of her HP, then do it again after she breaks the first platform, and then after 3 staggers she should be dead. One other thing to talk about are the uniques that are not included anywhere in the build, but that seem like they would be very good fit for the Ice Shards. This is the Ice Heart Brace and Frostburn. And, well, the problem with them is that they have a nice effect, but they have not very nice stats. So these pants just have completely nothing. None of these stats are very useful. And normal pants have million damage reduction rolls and a defensive aspect. If you don't and this defensive aspect is usually aspect of disobedience, which alone makes you three times tankier. And then on top of that, there's also damage reduction. So if you put on this unique instead of normal pants, and you also don't put your aspect of disobedience somewhere else, like on the helmet, you just die. The second problem it has is interaction with Enhanced Frost Nova. You need to kill 4 frozen enemies to get cooldown reduction from this. And if the pants proc another Frost Nova before you kill the 4 enemies, then this cooldown is just gone. You don't get it. And that can be very bad, especially if you use Frost Blitz, because then your cooldown is long, and you rely on this double Enhanced Frost Nova cooldown reduction, and you don't get it. And then your cooldown is suddenly 10 seconds, and you have to wait. So that makes them pretty bad. The second bad part is that you can't really combine them very well with Raiment of the Infinite, and Raiment of the Infinite is OP. So since you can do that because first, if you also, on top of having pants without any defensive aspects or rolls, you also have a chest without any defensive aspects or roll, well, that's a quick trip to the early grave for you. There's just no 2 ways to go about it. And second, if you pull all enemies together, well, they are probably gonna proc Frost Nova when they die while frozen, but this Frost Nova is gonna hit in the same area as the Raiment, and so there's no more enemies there because you pulled them all in the middle already. And you want Frost Nova to proc somewhere on the edge to spread it around. So these 2 items just work terribly together. And Frostburn have a different problem. They actually have 2 even good stats, crit chance and chance to restore resource. Unfortunately, the 2 stats that you are missing are attack speed and +4 ranks to Ice Shards, which is a lot of damage, and they're also gloves, so you're missing offensive aspect, and that means even more damage. Your weakest offensive aspect is Storm Swell, and that's 20% damage pretty much all the time when it matters. So yeah, it hurts a lot. And then, well, Freeze is nice to have, but it's also nice to have like 70% more damage. That being said, you can use those two items together to make a build that does not rely on Frost Nova. So you use Frostburn and Ice Heart, you don't use Raiment. And then you stack some Lucky Hit Chance and you have Aspect of Shared Misery. And what happens, you just find some enemies, you shoot Ice Shards into them, and then some of them get frozen. Your enchantments should start shooting more Ice Shards into them. That frozen debuff spreads with your Shared Misery, and then eventually frozen enemies start dying, and then one of them procs Frost Nova from the Ice Heart, and then they all get frozen, they all get vulnerable, and like everything explodes, Frost Nova spread, and you're happy. And this build works, and it kind of looks cool when it does, especially if you have a large group of enemies. But the problem, it just doesn't work well enough. So you lose a ton of damage, once again, from not having Raiment and having Frostburn. So it's only really good for speed farming, but, well, speed farming, like, it's just not fast enough. You need to shoot like a couple seconds into mobs to actually start the freezes going off. And then once the Frost Nodes actually proc, you don't even kill elites instantly, because once again, you lose a lot of damage and you're playing a speed farming build, which likely means no burning, so no extra damage from there. So it takes another second or two for your enchantment and your ice shards to kill elites, and then, yeah, that's already like 5 seconds down. And meanwhile, the normal version of the build, you just teleport, Frost Nova, pick up loot, teleport, Frost Nova, pick up loot. And you can't beat that.